Hi, I'm Joshua Lee, and in today's video, we'll be taking a look at the most important molecules for every living organism on Earth. Of course, these are the biological molecules or biomolecules. These molecules do many essential tasks in our body, from making up the structure of our body to storing genetic information. There are four main types of biomolecules. The first one is the carbohydrates. You probably already know about carbs. Carbohydrates are made up of sugars, generally monosaccharides, which are simple sugars. One example of a simple sugar that you are all probably familiar with is glucose. As most of you know, glucose is a byproduct of photosynthesis, so the sun's energy is used to make glucose. Its chemical formula is C6H12O6. There also happens to be another monosaccharide with the same chemical formula, fructose. Fructose has the same chemical makeup as glucose, but the elements are arranged a little differently. These little differences make fructose much sweeter than glucose. Like the monosaccharides, there are also disaccharides. Since di means two, disaccharides are basically two monosaccharides put together. A good example will be sucrose, which is a glucose molecule put together with a fructose molecule with a covalent bond. When a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide or a disaccharide, it is usually used for a short-term burst of energy. However, when more and more sugars start to link together, they become polysaccharides, poly meaning many. Polysaccharides are not only used as a source of energy, but as a storage system for energy. Since they're so big, they can also be used to build structures. One example of a polysaccharide would be cellulose. Cellulose is basically a long chain of glucose molecules put together. Since cellulose is so strong, it is used to make the cell wall of a plant cell. To humans, cellulose is very hard to digest. As I mentioned, polysaccharides are also great at storing energy. A good example would be starch. Starch is a polysaccharide that many plants use to store glucose, so when you eat bread with starch, most of the calories will be coming from the carbohydrates. In our human bodies, we store energy in a polysaccharide known as glycogen. Glycogen is much like starch, but unlike starch, it's much more complicated. It is often used as a short-term energy storage system though. This is not a problem though, because our body has a long-term energy storage system too, the fats. Fats or lipids are often bonded together because they are all non-polar molecules. Water is a polar molecule since one side of it is positively charged and the other side of it is negatively charged. So water doesn't like non-polar molecules and tries to repel them. This is why lipids don't mix with water. Lipids are made of glycerol and fatty acids. Glycerol is a type of alcohol and fatty acids are basically long chains of carbon and hydrogen. When you get three fatty acids and connect them to a glycerol, you get a triglyceride. Fatty acids can be either saturated or unsaturated with hydrogen. If the carbon atoms in the fatty acid are connected to each other by single bonds, then each carbon atom gets linked up with at least two hydrogen, and the last carbon atom picks up three. This means that the fatty acid will be saturated. However, if the carbon atoms are connected to each other with double bonds, they lose the ability to pick up the third hydrogen. So the fatty acid becomes unsaturated and it usually bends. There is one exception though, which is trans fat. Many people know that trans fat is really bad for you. This is partly because it doesn't exist naturally. Trans fats are basically unsaturated fatty acids that go straight instead of bending. Saturated fatty acids usually form oils and other liquids. Unsaturated fatty acids usually form solids. Remember how a triglyceride was three fatty acids connected to a glycerol? Well, if you have two fatty acids connected to a glycerol and you replace the last fatty acid with a phosphate group, you get a phospholipid. One end of a phospholipid is polar, making it hydrophilic, which means that it is attracted to water. The other end is nonpolar, making it hydrophobic, meaning that it repels water. Since phospholipids make up the cell membrane, they are very important in cell transport. Now we'll learn about proteins. Proteins have many different structures and functions. They have many important jobs throughout your body. The first use is structure. Proteins such as keratin are used to make up physical structures in your body, such as skin, nails, and hair. Proteins are also used in transportation. Proteins like ferritin and hemoglobin are used to transport important chemicals throughout your body. Proteins such as immunoglobulin are antibodies that protect your body from harmful bacteria and viruses. Proteins can also be used as hormones to send messages throughout your bodies. Proteins are made up of amino acids. When amino acids are linked together, they form a long chain known as a polypeptide chain. Sometimes the polypeptide chain can be a protein in of itself, but most of the time it has to go through multiple stages of folding to become a protein. This is a very simplified explanation of protein synthesis, but that's the basic idea. There are about 20 different types of amino acids, and 9 of which our bodies can't produce. These amino acids are called essential amino acids. Since our bodies can't produce them, we have to get them through the foods we eat. This is the structure of a typical amino acid. On the right side here, we have a carboxyl group. On the left side here, we have an amino group, hence the name amino acid. If you notice here in the amino group, we have a nitrogen. Protein contains nitrogen unlike carbohydrates and lipids, which is why proteins are important to consume. In the middle here, we have a carbon atom connecting the carboxyl group and the amino group. There's also a hydrogen atom connected too. Then we have this R. Now most of you are probably wondering what element R is. This R isn't really anything though, it's just a placeholder. So depending on what you put on this R, you get a different amino acid. Here we have lysine, arginine, and histidine. They are all 3 different amino acids because they have different R groups. In lysine, the R group is this. In arginine, it's this. And in histidine, it's this. So this R represents the R group, which will determine which amino acid this is going to be. Now it's time to learn about the last biological molecule, the nucleic acids. The nucleic part comes from the fact that they are first observed in the nucleus. The acid part comes from the fact that they have some properties of acids. The most famous nucleic acid would be DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. You probably know that DNA looks like a twisted ladder or a double helix shape. The rungs of the ladder would be made of nitrogenous bases. There are 4 nitrogenous bases: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Each of these bases has a complementary base that goes along with it. Adenine corresponds to thymine and cytosine corresponds to guanine. In RNA or ribonucleic acid, the thymine would be replaced with uracil. In your body, nucleic acids store genetic information. DNA and RNA are also very important in protein synthesis. In today's lesson, we learned about the 4 different types of biomolecules: the carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins, and the nucleic acids. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and thanks for watching.